This series is going to discuss landscape photography. When most people know about a landscape photographer, they generally know about Ansel Adams. And Ansel Adams was one of the pioneers of landscape photography in America because he went around and he shot a lot of national parks. And he shot in black and white. And he was very famous for the very high contrast images you see here. A lot of what he did was not so much in how he exposed the image, but was in the way he exposed the image in the darkroom. During his time, we used to process photographs in the darkroom. And I actually did some darkroom work before digital photography became popular. And it's hard. You can still do all the same stuff that we do in Lightroom and Photoshop now, but you had to do it all manually, and you had to do it all in the dark. And so he is very, very famous for his darkroom techniques that made his work pop, made his work iconic. Here he is, him out in one of the parks. Mostly he shot out in California. And he used one of these older cameras that film big media. It's called a large format, meaning that you have a larger. You start with a larger medium, and that when you capture pixels, you can capture more. Most people use small format cameras. There are we don't call them small format, which DSLRs or SLRs, which single lens reflex, medium format, which is larger, and then large format, which is even larger. And they're very expensive, and that's why most people don't shoot with those. But because he shot with large format, he was able to blow his work up really large. Okay. Ansel Adams passed on some of his legacy to people he knew in the landscape circle, in his landscape circle, photography circle. And David Munk is one of those people who had the pleasure of knowing and shooting with Ansel Adams. There he is. He and his work is just absolutely gorgeous. This is how you spell his name if you want to look him up further. David, Munch. He shoots national parks, and so he's won awards. And so a lot of the pictures you see of national parks, I even have this book. Oh, that's funny. I took a similar photo. I should show you guys mine. Anyway, he a lot of the pictures you see from national parks, David shot. And so David then got to mentor someone named Ed Ritchie. Ed Ritchie shot, this is some of his work, and he shoots all over the country. He lives in Idaho, which is actually where I met Ed, and he was teaching a class. That's not him. That's someone else named Ed Ritchie. Why is that? Okay, all right, sorry. This is not his work, but this is some of Ed's just beautiful work. And so he was teaching a workshop and that I attended, and I got to know Ed, and we became friends. And he shared a lot of his techniques with me. And so I'm going to show you, because I could talk for hours and hours and hours about landscape photography. I have more landscape photos than anything else. I've mostly shot landscapes. This is Mount Rainier out in Oregon. It's a national park. And when I went, I visited, it was just covered in clouds for days. And the last morning I woke up, the clouds had finally parted, and I got to see this beautiful sunrise on Mount Rainier. And that is a photo I took. Now, at the time, I was shooting slide film, and I will tell you, slide film is still produces the best, far and away, quality images. The problem is it's not very environmentally friendly, and it's expensive. So I now shoot fully digital. This is a landscape shot. Let's see, make sure these are in the screen here. This is a landscape shot I took out at Oakland Cemetery here in Atlanta. They did it's called Illumine. They do this every year, and they illuminate objects in the cemetery. And those of you who haven't been there, there are a lot more than graves. It's a garden. It's really beautiful. And so I took this shot in the cemetery, which is a garden, which is why it counts as landscape. And they had these balloons, and these balloons were massive. And so I took this shot in the cemetery at night. Now, you can't do this with your cell phone as well as I did with my DSLR here. And I am going to show you mixed photography throughout this class because I think it's important for you to see what you can do and what you want to get to. Because really, the main thing to focus on in this class is composition. And then that's just another one right as the sun was starting to set. That pretty alpenglow in the background. One of the most important things you want to do when you're shooting landscape is you want to have a foreground object. You want something in the foreground. Then you want a midground. And okay, so here are the crocus flowers that are blooming in the spring were my foreground. And then I've got a midground, which is the grass and the balloon. And then I've got a background, which is the cemetery itself and the sky. And the reason you want to have these layers is you want people's eye to travel through your photo, but also you want to give it a feel of 3-dimension. And that is how you do it. Now, what should be in focus is a matter of artistic decision. For this, I had the balloon in focus and the flowers in focus, because I felt that the white of the balloon and the white of the flowers connected to one another in the image. And everything in the background is a little bit blurry. I wanted people still to be able to see what it is as a mausoleum and some gravestones and bushes and trees. But the main focal point for me here was connecting the white of the balloon to the white of the flowers, because white in other cultures can represent death. And in our culture, it can represent spirituality or ghosts or, you know, any of that genre of color psychology or color interpretation. And so that for me was the connection. You can do a whole bunch of different things. Sometimes, most often, people will focus, make the foreground object if it's interesting in focus. If not, they'll make the middle ground in focus. But you can even make the background in focus, or you can make everything in focus. It just depends on what your message and your story are. Oops, I had opened a gazillion photos. Where did they go? Alright, well, I guess this is a good place to stop this video, and we'll continue in the next one so I can reopen all my photos.